Hello everyone, we're back with another season preview series video here to discuss. And today's we're looking at the Boston Bruins and the Buffalo Sabres. Two teams who have vastly different seasons last year. Buffalo just missed out on the playoff spot, while Boston was the top 3 team in the Atlantic Division and went a little bit far in the playoffs, reaching the second round. We'll look at how they did last year, we'll look at how they did in the offseason, and we'll look at how they're heading going into next year. We'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. We're able to love you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. And don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below, so let's get into this video. Now, we're going to look at the Bruins and the Sabres today, two teams who had interesting seasons. We'll start with the Boston Bruins. This past year, the Boston Bruins had a fantastic season. A lot of people thought they would be a wildcard team and maybe even miss the playoffs, but they wound up doing pretty well. They wound up finishing with a record of 47, 20, and 15 for 109 points, second in the Atlantic Division, 4th in the Eastern Conference, and 7th in the NHL. So they were a top 10 team again this year, so pretty good stuff there for Boston. They had 267 goals for, which is 12th in the NHL, so they had a pretty good offense, but they had 224 goals against, which was 6th in the NHL. So they had a fantastic defense, a really good, nearly top 5 defense, and nearly top 10 offense. So interesting note there. If you look at their point scoring leaders, Pastrnak led this team with 110 points. He was fantastic this past year. Marchand was second on the team with 67 points, and Coyle was third with 60 points. So they had a couple of plus 60 point players, including a plus 110 point player in Pastrnak. Goal scoring wise, same 3 guys were the 3 leaders. Pastrnak led their team with 47 goals, nearly another 50-goal season for Pastrnak. Marchand was second on the team with 29 goals, and Coyle was third on the team with 25 goals. So interesting to note there. The rookie scoring leader was Matthew Poitras. Poitras had 5 goals, 10 assists, and 15 points this past year, so he was pretty good. This team wound up making the playoffs, like we just said, second in the Atlantic Division, so they played third, which was the Toronto Maple Leafs. A long, hard-fought series that they nearly blew, but they did wind up winning in 7 games to face the eventual Cup champion Florida Panthers in round 2, in which they would win Game 1, lose the next 3 straight, win Game 5 to force a Game 6, and then lose in Game 6. So it was an interesting series, but they did wind up losing to the Florida Panthers in round 2, so it was in a round 2 exit for the Bruins, but a lot of people thought they would have missed the playoffs or been an early first round exit. So it was a really good season there for the Bruins. Playoff scoring leaders was Jake DeBrusk, who had 11 points, followed by Brad Marchand, who had 10 points. And then the goal scoring leaders in the playoffs were Jake DeBrusk, who had 5 goals, followed by David Pastrnak and Morgan Geekie, who both have 4 goals. So interesting to note there. If you look at their offseason, look at their additions and losses from this past year. If you look at their additions, they brought back Mark McLaughlin, they brought back Ian Mitchell, Alec Regula, and Brandon Bussi, a couple of decent RFAs, so interesting to note there. They also, in free agency, bring in Elias Lindholm from Vancouver on a long-term deal. He should be their new top-line center. They also bring in some forward help on the depth side by bringing in Max Jones, Riley Tuft, and Cole Kopik. Tuft and Kopik are most likely AHL, maybe even call-up option forwards, while Jones should be a solid bottom 6 forward for the Bruins. They also add Nikita Zadorov, who's going to help that defensive core out a lot on a long-term deal, 6 years at $5 million. And they also get Jordan Osterley on a short-term cheap deal to be sort of a depth defenseman for the Bruins. So that's pretty good there. If you look at the team's losses, though, they did lose quite a bit. They lost Jake DeBrusk, who was a solid top 6 forward this past year, to Vancouver. Lost James Van Riemsdyk, who's currently UFA. Lost Milan Lucic, who's currently UFA. They also lost Jesper Boqvist, who's in Florida. Lost Patrick Maroon to Chicago. Lost Oscar Steen, who's also UFA. And lost Anton Heinen to Vancouver. So they lost a lot of forward depth. Heinen, JVR were decent middle 6 forwards. The rest was solid top 6 forward, while the other ones were either 4th liners, spares, or call-up options. So interesting to note there. They also lose Derek Forbert to Vancouver, Kevin Shattenkirk, who's UFA, and Riley Walsh, who's currently in Los Angeles. So they do lose a couple of decent defensive players too, but I think the addition of Zadorov offsets any of those losses. So interesting to note there. They made 2 trades this offseason that didn't involve pick-for-pick swaps. Traded Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Marcus Stelic, Jonas Korpisalo with a $3 million cap hit, and a 2024 first-round pick, number 25th overall, originally Boston's. And then they also made a trade with the Minnesota Wild, trading Jacob Lauko and 2024 4th-rounder, number 110 overall, to the Minnesota Wild in exchange for Vinny Lettieri and 2024 4th-rounder, number 122 overall. So an interesting move there for the Bruins, but not too much in the trade market. Just moving on from Ullmark, getting what they could in return, and then making a swap of depth forwards in Lauko and Lettieri. So interesting to note there, but definitely Not too many really great trades, and they definitely did lose a lot of players in free agency, so interesting note there. If we look at their top 3 picks from this past year's draft, their first rounder, number 25th overall, they took Dean Letourneau, who's a center. Eventually should be a solid second, third line player. Pretty good player there for the Bruins, someone we thought would have gone in the second round, but Bruins took off the board at the first round. The second pick in this draft was 4th round, number 110th overall. Took Elliot Gronwald, who's a left shot defenseman, and eventually could be a solid third, maybe second paired guy, so a pretty good pickup there. And then their third pick was in the 5th round, number 154th overall, and that was Jonathan Morello. Morello, who's also a center, could eventually be a solid third, fourth line center there for the Bruins. So they made some interesting adds in the draft. They didn't have too many draft picks, but they did make do with what they had, so interesting to note there. If we look at the 2 biggest questions entering the training camp, one is the Swayman contract. We talked about this recently in the past couple of videos. Swayman's looking for $10 million, potentially even more. Maybe by the time this hits YouTube, he's signed, but that Swayman contract's a big one to be worried about right now if you're the Boston Bruins. So it'll be interesting to know if he's able to get signed before training camp starts, or if this winds up dragging on for a little bit. And 2, who fills out the bottom 6? The bottom 6 is interesting to note this year. Like we said, they had a lot of off-season losses. Do some of the more of the younger guys wind up stepping up this year, or who winds up making the bottom 6 this year for the Bruins? It'll be interesting to note there. But those are 2 biggest questions in my opinion for the Bruins for training camp. 1, does Swayman sign his contract? That Swayman contract's a big question. And 2, who ends up filling out the bottom 6 this year? So interesting to note there. If I look at my current projected lineup for this team for the 24-25 season, at this point in time I currently have Brad Marchand playing on the top line with Elias Lindholm and David Pastrnak. I have Trent Frederick on line 2 with Matthew Poitras and Pavel Zacha. On line 3, I have John Beecher with Charlie Coyle and Morgan Geekie. And on line 4, I have Marcus Stellage centering Max Jones and Justin Brazeau. So that's a decent forward group. Defensively, I have Lohrei playing with McAvoy on the top line, Hampus Lindholm playing with Brandon Carlo on the second line, and Andrew Peeke playing with Nikita Zadorov on the third line. That's a pretty good defensive core. I have Swayman being the starter as soon as he's able to sign his contract, Korpisalo being the backup, and I have McLaughlin, Brown, and Osterley all being the spares. And so long as Swayman signs for under $8.5 million, that would be a cap compliant roster. So interesting to note there. I think that's a pretty good roster there for the Bruins if Swayman does sign his new contract. Going over to my current projections for the Bruins for this upcoming season. Now, over the past couple of years, undervalued the Bruins way too much. 2 years ago, I expected the Bruins to miss the playoffs. They made it. Last year, I expected them to sneak in the playoffs as a second wildcard team, wound up being a top 3 team in the Atlantic. So I'm not going to undervalue them again. I expect them to make the playoffs. They made some interesting moves. I think they are able to keep in a playoff spot, especially with a team like Tampa, I think, getting worse, and a team like New York not really doing much. I think the Boston was able to keep ahead of most of those teams, but I do have them falling a little bit here, and I have them being a wildcard team. So I have them finishing with 95 points. That's 14 points lower than last year, so it is a little bit of a step back still, and I think that's mainly due to the fact that Ullmark isn't here, and Swayman does have a lot of big questions. I could see him finish third in the Atlantic. I have Ottawa finishing just ahead of them, so I could easily see him flip-flopping on Boston being still a top 3 team in the Atlantic. So I'm not 100% concrete that this team's going to be finishing first wildcard position, but I do think they'll take a little bit of a step back and finish a little bit lower than they did last year. But I think they'll easily finish third in the Atlantic or first wildcard, but at this point in time I have them finishing 14 points lower than last year with 95 points, and I have them finishing first wildcard in the Eastern Conference. So I still have them making the playoffs, still them being a playoff team. I just had them taking a little bit of a step back. So interesting to note there. Going over the theories I can see this team improve to get better for next year. 1, they need better goal scoring. As much as they were a really good team, that team was led by Pastrnak and Marchand, and I think if they could get some more goal scoring, especially from the bottom 6, that could really help that team improve from last year. Like we said, they were 12th in the NHL in goal scoring. If they could be a top 10 team this year in goal scoring, that could be a really good addition there for the Bruins. 2 is strong goalie play. The only reason I mention this is because they did have really good strong goalie play last year is because they lost Ullmark, and now Korpisalo is their backup, and now there's some talk about Swayman potentially not being able to start the season due to his contract. Probably won't happen, but still, there's a lot of interesting updates there when it comes to their goaltending. So they need some strong goaltending play, especially from Korpisalo. Even if Swayman signs, you're going to need some really good play from him to sort of recover from the loss of Ullmark. So this team needs strong goalie play if they're going to try and improve off of last year's season. And lastly, they need their youth to grow. As we talked about, if they can have guys like Lohrei, Poitras, Beecher, and maybe a couple of other young guys take steps this year, it could really help the Bruins be a lethal team again for this upcoming season. So in my opinion, those are 3 areas this team can improve: better goal scoring, especially from the bottom six, strong goalie play, and their youth growing. So interesting note there. Now, if you look at all this team, what they did, their trades, which were decent, their free agent additions, which were solid, especially, but they did lose a couple of decent players, especially a lot of depth. I'm going to give them a B minus. I think I was contemplating a C plus or a B minus. I'm going to give them a B minus here. They did all right. Linus Ullmark needed to be moved for cap reasons, so they got the best deal they could, getting Korpisalo and Kastelic in return. They made a decent swap there with Lauko and Lafferty. Lost a lot of depth, but they did get Zadorov and Lindholm, which I think will definitely help on their defensive end, as well as being a new top line center in Lindholm. So I think they did all right. I think a B minus is warranted. Like I said, I do still think that they'll probably fall off a little bit, especially after losing some of their depth. But I think they're still a really good team, and I think the B minus is warranted for this Bruins team. So interesting to note there. Lastly, going over to the Buffalo Sabres. Now, when it comes to Buffalo Sabres, this past year was a little bit of a down season after finishing with 91 points, only a point back of a playoff spot 2 years ago. Last year was a bad season for them, finishing with like a 39, 37, and 6 for 84 points, 6th in the Atlantic, 12th in the Eastern Conference, and 22nd in the NHL, finishing just a mere 7 points back of a playoff spot. So still within striking distance of a playoff spot, but we're further back than they were the previous year. They had 246 goals for, tied for 22nd in the NHL, so they were not overly great goal scoring team after having a fantastic goal scoring season the year prior. While goals against was actually quite respectable with the 244 goals against for 11th in the NHL, so that was decent enough for the Buffalo Sabres. If you look at their point scores from this past year, no player hit the 60 points for the Buffalo Sabres. You can see why they were one of the lower teams in the goal scoring department. Alex Tuch had 59 points, as did Rasmus Dahlin. Those are two guys who are tied for the lead in points. And then Tage Thompson had 56 points, so interesting to note there. If you look at their goal scorers, Tage Thompson led the team with 29 goals, followed by Peterka, who had 28, and Skinner, who had 24. So also no players hit 30 goals for the Buffalo Sabres last year, so you can see they were a low team when it comes to the goal scoring department. The rookie scorer leader was Zach Benson, who had 11 goals, 19 assists, and 30 points in his rookie season. Looked fantastic last year in the top 9 for the Buffalo Sabres, so it was a pretty good pickup there for Buffalo. But still, it was not an overly great season if you look at it from the Buffalo Sabres point of view. If you look at their additions and losses from this past year's offseason, if you look at their additions, brought back Brett Murray, Henry Jokiharju, Jacob Bryson, Cale Clegg, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who are mostly RFAs. They also bring in Jason Zucker in free agency on a 1-year deal, Sam Lafferty on a 2-year deal, Nicholas Abuki-Bell on a 1-year deal, so they add some more bottom six help in Zucker, Lafferty, and Abuki-Bell. Also add some defensive help in guys like Dennis Gilbert and Jack Rathbone, and then they also add Felix Sandstrom and James Reimer in the net, so they've now got a solid 3rd and 4th string goaltenders in their system, so interesting to note there. Meanwhile, their losses, they lose Victor Olofsson to Vegas. He was never coming back. They lose Girgensons to Tampa. They lose Josen Robinson to Carolina, lose Brandon Biro to Seattle, lose Riley Stillman to Carolina, and then they also lose Eric Comrie to Winnipeg. So not a whole bunch of additions and losses. The additions, I think, are better on the forward group, but they did lose a little bit more depth in the forward group. They definitely got a couple of decent defenders. I think their goaltending's improved in the free agent moves, so interesting note there, but I think they did all right. So when it comes to the free agent moves, I feel like their trades, made 2 trades this year that weren't pick for pick swaps. Traded their 2024 second round pick, number 43 overall, to the Washington Capitals in exchange for Zucker and Malenstyn, who they would eventually sign. That's a pretty good pickup there. He's a solid bottom 6 forward too, so a pretty good pickup there. Maybe a little bit of an overpayment to get him for a second round pick, but still it's a pretty good pickup there. And then they also traded Matthew Savoie, who was one of their former high level prospects, to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for Ryan McLeod and Tyler Tullio. So that was an interesting move. I was surprised that they moved Savoie to Edmonton. Savoie is a really good player, and I'm surprised they wound up having to move on from him, but McLeod's a solid 3rd line center who can be a really good speedy forward. Tullio might eventually be a solid bottom 6 forward, so it's a decent trade, but I'm a little bit surprised they had to move on from Matthew Savoie. So interesting note there. If we look at the top 3 picks in this past year's draft, they took Konstantin Helenius, who's a center left winger, in the 1st round, 14th overall. He looks like eventually he's going to be a solid top 6 forward there for the Sabres, so interesting pickup there. They took Adam Kleber in the 2nd round, number 42nd overall. He's a right shot defenseman, a really big guy. I think eventually could be a solid 3rd, maybe 2nd pair of defenseman for that Sabres team. And the 3rd round, number 71st overall, they took Brody Zimmer, who's a right winger. I think eventually could be a solid 2nd, 3rd line player there for the Sabres. So all in all, some pretty good draft picks. I think they had a lot of really good draft selections this draft year, so some pretty good pickups there, especially a guy like Helenius, who I think eventually will be a solid top 6 forward there. I think there are 2 biggest questions in my opinion entering training camp. It's 1, who plays in the nets? They have 3 really good goaltenders in Devin Levi, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and James Reimer. They did a 3 goaltending system last year. It never really worked out for them, so do they start Reimer in the minors and go with Levi Luukkonen, or do they start Levi in the minors and go with Reimer Luukkonen? I think that's an interesting question that's going to need to be answered in training camp. Who winds up taking the goal? Meanwhile, another question is which young forwards make the team. They have a lot of really good young guys. On the defensive end, they have Ryan Johnson. On the goaltending side, we just said they have Devin Levi. On the forward group, they have a guy like maybe Konstantinius. They also have Noah Ostlund. They have Wahlberg. They have Kulik. They have Rosen. They have a ton of really good prospects on the forward group too, especially a lot of younger guys who could want to make the team. So I think the two biggest questions, in my opinion, is one, which goaltenders will end up manning the net to start the season, and two, which young forwards are able to make the team coming out of training camp. So it'll be interesting to see exactly who ends up happening there. Going over to my projected lineup for the Buffalo Sabres for 24-25 season. Now, as it sits right now, I have JJ Peterka playing on the top line with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuck. I have Zach Benson playing on line 2 with Jack Quinn and Dylan Cousins. On line 3, I have Ryan McLeod centering Yuri Kulik and Jason Zucker. And on line 4, I have Jordan Greenway playing with Beck Malenstyn and Sam Lafferty. Defensively, I have Samuelson playing with Rasmus Dahlin. I have Owen Power playing with Henry Jokiharju, and I have Bowen Byram playing with Connor Clifton. So that's a decent defensive core. On the goaltending side, I have UPL and James Reimer being 2 goalies. And then I have Nicholas Abuki-Bell, Lucas Rusak, and Dennis Gilbert being the 3 spares. So that's a pretty good forward group in my opinion, defensive core and goaltending for the Sabres. So I think that's a pretty good lineup for the Sabres. If you're asking me, that's a pretty good lineup. Meanwhile, going over to how I think the Sabres will do this season. Now, there's a lot of teams in the race for playoff hunts right now, including Buffalo. You got Ottawa, you got Detroit, you got the Islanders, Penguins, Capitals. You could even throw maybe even the Canadians or the Blue Jackets or the Bolts in there as well. So there's a lot of teams out there right now currently trying to fight for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. So I think the Sabres are going to have a better season than last year. But unfortunately, as much as they're a favorite team of mine, and I would love to see them in the playoffs only for me because they're one of my favorite teams, but also given the fact that they've missed the playoffs for so many straight years, I would like to see them make the playoffs. But I really do think they're probably going to miss again. At this point, with the current standings as it sits right now, for me at least, I had the Sabres finishing with 90 points. 6 higher than last year, but I had them missing the playoffs by 2 points. So once again, had them missing out just ever so slightly at this point. Maybe they surprise me. Maybe they do make the playoffs. I would love to see that. But at this point in time, I can't see the Buffalo Sabres ousting a team like the Washington Capitals or Ottawa Senators for a playoff spot. So that's my current projection for the Sabres. I have them finishing 5th in the Atlantic. I have them finishing 9th in the Eastern Conference. And I have them missing just out of a playoff spot, hitting 90 points, which is 6 higher than last year. So interesting note there. If we go through, as I can see this team improve to get better for next year. One, they need more offense. Last year, offensively, they were a horrible team. So if they can get some more offensive production, this team should be a much better team than last year. 2, consistent goaltending. Last year, towards the end of the season, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was fantastic, but at the very beginning of the season, they were very inconsistent with guys like Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, Comrie, Levi. There was no consistency early on, so if they need consistent goaltending throughout the entire season, if they're going to have a better season than last year, and a better power play. The power play wasn't overly great this past year, something I think they definitely need to work on, so hopefully some of their additions can help them on the power play and make them a little bit more lethal. So in my opinion, more offense, consistent goaltending throughout the entire season, and a better power play will help this team be a lot better than they were last year. So interesting to note there. And lastly, going over to their off-season rating. Now, in my opinion, they did decently this off-season, got a little bit better in their bottom 6. They definitely, I think, improved in the defensive end, improved in the goaltending side. I think they did really well this off-season, but they didn't really make any of those big splashes, and they did give up on Matthew Savoie. So, in my opinion, I'm giving them a C+ rating. I think that's sort of warranted for where they are right now. It's a little bit lower than I originally gave them, but I think this is really warranted for them. I mean, they lost a couple decent depth forwards, add some pieces. I think McLeod's going to be a really good addition there, so is Malenstyn, so is Zucker and Lafferty. So I think they're going to have some really good additions there on the forward group. I think the bottom 6 will be a little bit better this year. Defensively, it stays relatively the same. Goaltending-wise, I think Reimer could be a really good addition there, especially with a younger goaltending core. But still, I'm not exactly sure if they're really a whole bunch better than they were last year. So I think a C+ rating for this offseason is warranted. But that's all I'm talking about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below. What do you think about the Sabres and the Bruins? Do you agree with how these two teams did in the offseason? Did they do good? Did they do bad? What do you think about my predictions for both the Sabres and the Bruins? Do you agree that the Bruins may be a playoff team this year and that the Sabres will probably miss again? Or do you think that the Sabres will maybe make the playoffs and the Bruins will miss? Definitely have your thoughts on all of that. And what do you think about these two teams down in the comment section below? So I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video. If you'd like to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support when you're able to with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe subscribe button down below. Don't leave a comment down in the comment section below so we can all discuss in today's video. Also a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. Leave a link to that in the description below, and can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.